Hello there. We are getting started. I'm Alex Baca with Greater Washington. I'm going to give just a minute or two for additional people to hop on, and then we're just going to get right into it. So thank you so much for being here. Hi, Karthik. Okay, it's 6:02. I'm sure we'll have some people joining us as we get started with this. I want to just say hello. My name is Alex Baca. I'm the DC Policy Director at Greater Washington. I'm here with Christine Mayer, who is on the Vision Zero team and works alongside the District Department of Transportation on road safety. So the purpose of this is that sort of in my experience, I think also in Christine's experience, probably in the experience of many people on here, a lot of times when you hear from the District Department of Transportation, it's about a specific project in your neighborhood. And we wanted to pull back from that a little bit and present to people sort of how DDOT works, who works there, how decisions are made regarding what projects to pursue, why certain projects look like they do. Our programming tonight is made possible with a grant through the Mobility Fund, which we're super grateful for at GGWash. And we are kind of keeping this small, which I'm excited about because hopefully it will enable you to ask some questions of the agency and demystify a little bit what you typically don't have the full room to ask about when you're being presented with a project. So really appreciate you all taking the time. This will be recorded. We'll certainly share it when we're done. And so, we have a series of these for the following 2 Mondays, and then the last Wednesday of the month. We're doing one each for in order, wards 8, 7, and 5. So we'll talk a little bit more about what you can expect to see in those wards. We have chosen to do these in sort of the east side of the district, largely because there's a lot of traffic crashes and fatalities, and DDOT will probably be doing work in your neighborhood at some point, and hopefully this is a good way to explain some of the inputs into that. So I'm here to facilitate, here to just sort of figure out, how to get people onto the call and answer your questions. Most communications will be coming from me, but I'm going to hand it over to Christine Mayer at the district's Vision Zero office, and Brant Miller is here also from DDOT, who will also be presenting. So thank you so much to everyone for being here.
Great, thanks. Let me go ahead and share my screen. I'll run the PowerPoint for us. All right, everybody see that? Okay, so welcome everybody. Thanks for joining. We're excited to talk to you all about just an overview of DC government and DDOT and sort of transportation elements, what goes into a project, how projects are governed, and a little bit sort of backing up how DC is governed and how DDOT sort of gets its authorities and different things like that. So we'll go over quickly a government structure, our legislative process. Brant will go over that, budget formulation and sort of sequencing, about that, how that sort of works. And then we'll go into DDOT structure, our org chart, and then some of how projects become infrastructure and common misconceptions that we hear. We also want to talk about Kelly Jong Olson will be on a little bit later and talk about how DDOT reaches out and works with ANCs. So just to start off, we'll start with sort of the three branches of government. Just going back to your civics classes and in high school and college, we're governed by three branches of government: executive, legislative, and judicial. We'll be focusing more on the executive and legislative branches this time. And with that, I will throw it over to Brant.
Thank you, Christine. Yes, we're not going to talk about the judiciary today. I would hate to think that we have to start talking about the judiciary for our projects extensively, but in 2023, who knows what's in store. So yes, we'll start with the legislative body. Obviously, we have three branches, basic like civics 101 stuff. If you want to go to the next slide, Christine. The legislative branch org chart, this is based on a larger chart that we will get to in a later slide, but you have residences, businesses, and institutions, the ANCs, and council. So obviously, as ANCs, you work with residents, businesses, and institutions in your SMDs and your commissions, who bring you concerns, feedback, things you want to see either from the executive side or the legislative side, and you filter some of that stuff up back to council and the executive. The council, who passes laws, obviously approves our budget, and has basic oversight over the executive branch. And then, so the first thing we'll talk about very briefly is how a bill becomes a law. Obviously, DC has some unique stuff in it. There's on council's website, they have LIMS. So lims.dccouncil.gov, and that is where you can track bills on the council side. And yet they actually have like a Domino's pizza tracker sort of thing at the top, where you can see the steps that a bill has to go through. This is the steps for a standard bill. There are other kinds of bills. There's emergency bills, temporary bills that usually address the gap that's created through congressional review of our legislation. So legislation is introduced either at the legislative meeting, the committee of the whole, or filed with the council secretary. It can be introduced by the mayor by transmitting it to the chairman of the council. The chairman then assigns it to the appropriate committee. In our case, obviously, it's the T&E committee, the Transportation and Environment Committee, chaired by council member Charles Allen. The committee will then consider that legislation, and if they take no action, it does not move to the larger council body for a vote. But then it could be considered through a hearing and then agendized through the committee of the whole. Then there's 2 readings for council, and then it is transmitted to the mayor if it's passed by council, who has 10 days to sign. Once council can override the mayor's veto with a 2/3 majority. This is not something we see commonly, but there are things in this flow that are distinct in 2022, 2023 that we haven't seen as much in the past, including that congressional review period coming into play. So for criminal acts, they have 60 days to review, but for most acts, they have 30 days to review. They typically do a passive review where they don't take any action, and then the bill will become a law. Normally, we cannot take action on a bill until it has completed its congressional review period. That leads us to the executive. So those laws, there's this delegation principle where like council can delegate authority to the mayor or to specific bodies in the district government to create rules and to implement programs. So now with the executive, this is the org chart that I was talking about earlier. On the left, you'll see the legislative branch, which includes the council, the auditor, and ANCs. At the very top is residents, of course, and the executive branch under them, which includes the mayor. You'll see highlighted in red DDOT at the top of the Demois cluster, the deputy mayor for operations and infrastructure. Our deputy mayor is Lucinda Babers. Our director is Everett Lott. I think the next slide is also an org chart for DDOT. And so you can see here that DDOT is separated into administrations, who are then headed up by chiefs. So for example, our performance management administration is headed by the chief performance officer. Our project delivery administration is headed up by our chief project delivery officer. As I said, Everett Lott is our director. Sharon Kirschbaum is our deputy director. So this is the meat of what I want to talk about today, the regulatory process, because this is what lies within DDOT's wheelhouse. So there are three types of rules generally. There's mayor's rules or mayor's orders. These are administrative rules issued by the mayor to carry out her duties. This is also where she can delegate authority to agencies to make rulemakings. There are agency rules, which are our standard rulemakings, proposed rulemakings, and final rulemakings that are adopted by the agencies. And then there are emergency rules. So emergency rules are good for 120 days. They usually can only be implemented in a narrow set of circumstances and do not require a public comment period. So all of our rules are published in the DC Register, which I will show you shortly, and then they are compiled into the DCMR or the DC Municipal Regulations. Our rules are initially published as proposed and include a public comment period that is typically 30 days. Rules that include fines or fees may have a 45-day public comment period that includes council review. If there are significant changes to a proposed rulemaking, it may have to go to a second proposed or third proposed or fourth proposed rulemaking before it is published as final. And those rulemakings will also have a public comment period that is typically 30 days. And I'll show an example of this in a minute. So ANCs in this rulemaking process receive great weight. And again, I will give an example of this shortly, but usually that means if members of the public submit comments to the agency about rulemakings, the agency can respond generally. So if 20 people all comment on a rulemaking saying the same thing, you know, we can say like 20 people questioned the A, B, or C thing or supported X, Y, and Z thing. Whereas if an ANC submits comments, we do have to go item by item and respond to their specific concerns. So actually, if I can share my screen now really quickly, I can just show you the DC Register website. I think this will do what I want. Desktop 2. So I think everyone should be just shortly seeing. Nope, that's the wrong thing. How do I share my other screen? Sorry, I am always trying to do the right thing. Great, okay. So this is the DC Regs website, and I want to show you this because it can be a bit of a challenge to access rulemakings through this way. So I'm just going to go over some very basic stuff. You can use this full text search feature here. So if I wanted to learn more about shared fleet devices, I could look up shared fleet devices in this text box, but you will get back an extensive search result. So you're going to see a lot of things that have definitions where this term or parts of this term may be defined. But if you scroll down, you'll see some specific rulemakings about shared fleet devices. So you'll see in Title 24, Chapter 33, there are several sets of rules that govern shared fleet devices, and you can click on these to read more, but also from the website homepage, if you click on this chapter number box, you can type in the title and chapter that you're looking for. So in this case, it's 2433. And you will get the page of all of that chapter. So this chapter governs public right-of-way occupancy permits and public space and safety is the title, right? So DDOT is normally going to be found under titles 18, which is vehicles and traffic, and 24, which is public space. There are other titles that may apply to DDOT, but these are the two primary ones. And so if I look down here, I can see where dockless sharing vehicles are located. If I click view text, it will download the rules for me and I can open them up and see what these rules are. If I click on the little hyperlink here to the left that says the section name, it doesn't take me to the rules, but instead to a summary of the authority and the effective date of those rules. And then you can see the history of the rulemakings that have been published relating to that chapter. And so this is where you can see some proposed rulemakings about this and when they were published. So you'll see like this is proposed and that's proposed. So this is actually a first and second proposed rulemaking. And then there's a final rulemaking, which is what effectuated the rules. So if I click on this one and I open it really quick, you'll see in this where we delineate in our public comment review ANC's comments, where we go comment by comment and respond to specific requests from the ANC here. And that's what you'll normally see in response to the great weight authority that ANCs have. Additionally, every week, the DCMR publishes the DC Register. So if you go here to browse through DC Register issues, this usually takes a second. You'll see a list chronologically of all DC Register issues, which includes proposed rulemakings, which is where if you wanted to check every week to see what you can comment on as an ANC, that's where those are published. You can also follow the DC Office of Documents on Twitter at DC Regs. At a time when I had Twitter, I followed them. They were the only one whose notifications I subscribed to. And so around 11 a.m. every Friday, I got a little ping that the register had been published, and they hyperlinked to it there. And it's truly the only thing they tweet. A nice little automated thing for you to keep up, so you don't have to subscribe to another mailing list. And you'll see here, if you click on an issue for a given date, sorry, that happened faster than I expected. I'm gonna stop this so it doesn't go so slow. You'll see where it lists laws, acts, proposed rulemakings that are published that week. This is only going to show you what's been published. So there were no final rulemakings, so that's not listed here. But if there had been a final rulemaking, you would see that there. And so if I click on these proposed rulemakings, it's going to list out the proposed rulemakings that have been published. And typically, again, there's going to be a 30 public comment day period from when this is published. And that's how long you have to submit public comments to the agency. Their contact information is listed at the end of the rulemaking. And so that's it for my screen sharing. If we want to go back to the presentation, I think that might have been the last slide. Yes.
Brant, before we jump into that,
yeah.
Besides looking at what's available within the regs to see like where ANCs have been given great weight, why would somebody want to look at the regs?
That's a great question. So I gave the example of shared fleet devices. I think that's a really good example because there's a lot of public interest in it. Shared fleet devices are the rental electric scooters and electric bikes that you see in the public space, operated by private companies who have received public space permits from DDOT. So that includes Lime, Spin, these other companies. There's 4 of them. VO is a new entrant into the district. And so those programs are governed by rules, right? They have terms and conditions that the operators have to comply with. And those terms and conditions are outlined in that rule that I clicked on earlier. That is actually because council passed legislation that required DDOT to promulgate rules that specifically outlined the terms and conditions. And so there is interplay between council and DDOT in terms of creating regulations. We may do it because we are required to by law or because we are given the authority to by council.
Great, thank you. I look at the regs. I realize not everybody looks at the regs, but sort of, one of the reasons that I'm glad Brant is able to talk about this for those of you who are attending is that if you want to see what the law is, that's how you see what the law is and like what the law has resulted in terms of the regulatory process.
And I will also say that the DC regs website can be a little slow. I will also just say that council has a very good website for looking through the DC code. The code trumps the regulations. That is like how American democracy works. We are given authority through council, delegation authority. And so you can look at code, like items that are in the code through DC Council's website and look up specific bills through their legislative management system, which is called LIMS, L-I-M-S. They link to both through the council website.
Great, thank you.
Absolutely. I think that was my last slide. Is that right, Christine?
Yeah. So yes.
Cool.
I'm going to see if there are any questions about the regulatory process.
Yeah, absolutely. Feel free to ask me anything ideally relevant, but you can ask me anything. We'll see what I can come up with.
Actually, if you wanted to go into a little bit more detail in the difference between the code and the regs, besides the fact that the code trumps regulations, I think that would be helpful. And anyone else, feel free to put questions in the chat or speak up or whatever you would like.
Yeah, so the code is born out of the congressional authority we have to govern ourselves, and council can amend or add to the code. They can also make changes to the regulations, the DCMR through legislation, though that's not as common. But DDOT cannot amend the code. And that's like the distinction between them, is that council can create legislation that specifically edits parts of the regulations that they have the authority to change. And they can also do that to the code through the legislative process. That's what the legislative process is normally doing, is amending the code. And then the executive and DDOT can only change regulations. And so if there's a change in the code that we need, what we actually have to do is have the mayor transmit a proposed legislative package to the chairman, who will then introduce it on behalf of the mayor for council to review.
And this all sounds super complicated, but it is kind of the result of having two different branches of government that have two different types of power. Yes,
and it allows the helpful thing about the regulations is that it allows subject matter experts and the executive to get into sort of the meat and potatoes, the daily operations of government working for residents, and council is included in that by giving the authority to the executive to do that. And so it allows our council, which is obviously a much smaller body with more limited resources than the executive branch, to continue with their what's under their purview.
Great. Any other questions? Anybody have any questions about the regulatory process? If not, I'm going to tell Christine to keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. If anyone has any questions later, you can contact me. My email address is my name, brant.miller@dc.gov. And I will stay until 7:30 in case there's more questions at the end.
Great, thank you.
All right. So one of the major things we wanted to talk about here are kind of common misconceptions and things that people hear and often think about transportation projects. So the first of which is projects just take too long. But what we wanted to cover here is like how a project idea or initiative becomes infrastructure, when communities can have the most input, and then why projects often get delayed. So starting with like scale and scope. So we have a citywide, the technical name is Controlled Long Range Transportation Plan, which is MOVE DC, or Constrained Long Range Transportation Plan. MOVE DC is citywide. It sort of dictates where within that are programs, policies, initiatives, where we're heading on that. So that really sets the stage. And then the programs and policies sort of follow on to that and then try and build out their different projects and program areas. So we have a bus priority program, for example, that is doing just that. They have their own plan, but within that, they're implementing MOVE DC priorities for bus transportation. Within that are small area plans or programs related to small areas. So safety and mobility studies, formerly known as livability studies. Safe routes to schools is again a small area where we're looking at kind of a transportation network within a small neighborhood or area around a key generator for pedestrians or bicyclists or what have you. Infrastructure projects can be corridor wide. So you'll see those like Benning Road streetcar for like a massive kind of infrastructure project where we're adding rails into the street, things like that. Or bus or bike lane projects. So 16th Street, for instance, a couple of bike lane projects like, let's see, New Jersey Avenue is a good one. Then we've got intersection projects, and those again can range, but they're very kind of limited in scale and scope to that specific intersection. So Dave Thomas Circle being an example of that, or an intersection project like Wisconsin and M, something like that, just looking at the intersection itself and the treatments that we can have there. And then even smaller than that are single locations, quick build treatments like speed humps, sign updates or upgrades or additions, things like that. So this chart, it takes a little bit to sort of understand, but when communities can have the most input. So the time when you can have the most input is during Move DC, where you can tell us, tell DDOT, tell DC government where you want different things in your neighborhood. And that dictates where a line goes on a map. And then from there, that will move to the program plans. And that's when, if the line is on the map in Move DC, then that's sort of the guide for those program areas, like our bike program and our bus program, our freight program, and things like that, to guide their policies and where they're focusing and where they're collaborating on a lot of different projects. So at that point, the goal is to implement those mode priority, whether that's dedicated bus lanes or bike lanes or curbside management or, different things like that. When we get even smaller down into corridor intersection projects, things like that, that's when you have it's a lot more of a detailed conversation. So the input level is very targeted on those specific issues. So you'll see design concepts and plans, things where we're already taking that kind of line that was a little bit abstract in Move DC and turning that into what it might look like, and a couple options for what it might look like on the street. And even further down into that when you get into design plans and a concrete kind of project moving forward. For capital projects, the process can be really extensive. So in each of these little P bubbles, that's a procurement process. And procurement means that's when we're going out and we're saying, all right, we want to look at planning for this corridor. We ask the industry for cost estimates to say, how much would it cost for you to help us out with this project, to a couple of firms, deciding who will do the work. So we assemble a panel of staff with different backgrounds to look at these cost proposals and try and pick the best firm with the best qualifications and the on budget as much as possible. There's a lot of rules that go into procurement. Sometimes you have to pick the lowest bidder. Sometimes there's certain things and percentages that contractors have to meet, but each one of those bubbles is a chance for procurement. So you'll see a little bit later, that's a place where we can really get into delay. But generally a project will go through planning, which is where we look at existing conditions, we start developing concepts, we start analyzing those concepts, and then try and come up with a preferred concept to move forward. From there, we'll do an environmental analysis of that concept. Usually we come out of planning with something like a 30% design, and we'll document expected impacts, what mitigation measures we're taking, different things like that go into the environmental process. Some of them can be very extensive. Some of them can be a little bit shorter, depending on the scale and scope of that project.
And Christine, one question. What is 30% design?
30% design is where you've gone from just like lines on the map and kind of conceptual drawings to something that takes into account measurements of the street, what the curb to curb width is, what the right of way is. Usually you'll have a survey, which is like an actual landscaping survey. If you see people out there with the tripods and the cameras, those are actual surveyors, and they're taking pictures of the street and documenting conditions so that then our contractors or our own staff can develop design plans off of that.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. So from there, design will go into survey if we don't have it already, rounds of review on those design plans. And this is usually for capital projects where it goes to our infrastructure and project management division or administration, otherwise known as IPMA. And these are the massive capital projects that take many years to implement and design and go through kind of construction processes for it. After that, you will then go into right-of-way. So this is purchasing if we need to, or preparing the right-of-way as we need to construct the project. So If we need to purchase right of way, like in the case of Shepherd Branch Trail, we need to dedicate money for that, go through the purchasing process. There's a whole manual dedicated to right of way procedures that we have. If there's something in the public right of way that maybe needs to be moved or mitigated in the design plans, that's the time to sort of work on that. That way, when we go right into construction, the crews there don't have any other obstacles or things in their way. After that goes to plans, specifications, and estimates. This is taking the final construction plans and tabulating essentially how many feet of white striping do we need? How many traffic signal bulbs do we need? You know, it's very into the nitty-gritty of exactly how much is it going to take and of each type of material to construct this project. And then after that, it goes into construction. That's where you'll see the actual kind of concrete and digging and things going on in the ground. So why do projects get delayed? Number one, funding constraints and priorities. You've heard it from the mayor, a tough fiscal year coming up. So priorities have to be determined and made in terms of projects. So oftentimes things that may have been ready, if it's not a priority, we need to sort of shelve it for a little while until we have the funding to then go back and move it forward. Procurement can be a reason that projects get delayed, going through the processes, making sure everything is correctly documented. And then even then there are some things that come into play. Different firms can challenge the decision, and then it sort of goes back and forth for a few more months like that. Public right of way, like I just covered, anything that's sort of existing in the public right of way, that is something, if we need to purchase that can sometimes take a really, really long time for certain projects. Utilities as well. This is a picture under New York City, but under DC streets, it's very similar. We've got tons of pipes and electrical lines and water and gas and sewer, you know, and a lot of our streets were constructed in the 1700s or before. So we've got a lot going on under our streets, and sometimes pipes sort of appear out of nowhere that nobody really knew about. And it wasn't documented anywhere because this building was built in the 1600s. So lots of utility challenges come into play. Supply chain, this was an issue during COVID where we had signposts. That was one thing. There was a shortage of signposts. We couldn't get the signposts, or green latex paint was another one. And it was these kind of random things that just made projects a little bit harder and take a little bit longer to install. And then there's others, you know, there's a lot of dialogue about different projects and different opinions about what should or shouldn't be done. So that plays into it as well. The next one is DC or DDOT waits until someone dies to do something. So first I want to talk about some fatality facts, then our programs and projects at DDOT, and then a safe systems approach. First, fatalities in a given year are somewhat random. We analyze multiple years of data and include injury data to see trends and see citywide what's happening. So we look both citywide and on specific streets. We're looking for common crash types and then contributing factors to that. So whether that's behavioral, whether that's street design, you know, different things that are happening in regards to each of these crashes. We have high injury corridors and a high injury network that we re-examined and put out a new one with our 2022 update for Vision Zero. Most of those are arterial, and to update the number there, our high injury network covers about 5% of our street mileage, but includes about 44% of all fatalities and injuries within DC. So this is a really small percentage of streets that if we take really great action on, we can see major reductions in injuries and fatalities. We see concentrations in wards 5, 7, and 8, but they're somewhat randomly distributed within those wards. This is why we, again, look at multiple years. And then in terms of existing street safety compared to other jurisdictions, so on average, we lose about 5 residents or people visiting DC per 100,000 residents over the past several years. In comparison to the greater United States, the greater United States sees about 11 fatalities per 100,000 population. We tend to be a leader on safety treatments compared to other cities, like safety at our signals, bike lane design, and we constantly are learning from and collaborating with other cities, other jurisdictions, and learning from others to share knowledge. So this is how DDOT kind of does safety. So there's a number of proactive efforts. Again, this is Move DC. This is looking at our multimodal network, seeing where we can build out better transportation options for people. So you've got other options than just driving or walking or buses or what have you. You've got more options than that. So citywide, we've got an annual safety program that's looking at every year about 100 or more locations to do spot treatments. We've got our mode focus programs, again, our bus priority, bicycle priority, pedestrian networks, and our freight network. Standards and practices citywide, we've got a really extensive, and I think maybe one of the highest in the nation, percent of our signalized intersections that have leading pedestrian intervals, for example. About 90% of our signals have leading pedestrian intervals. This is where you get a head start over turning or through traffic when you're a pedestrian crossing at an intersection. Localized programs and plans are safety and mobility studies, safe routes to schools, and one that people discount is development review. Lots of our staff review developments as they come in and make recommendations for folks to get implemented with that. And we try and be really proactive with that and anticipate where we think crashes will happen so that we can apply the right treatments. And then infrastructure projects. So corridor treatments, when we get those, if we're doing like a streetscape project, you'll see a lot of those in our budget. Intersection-based projects as well. We are looking back at past crash data from either property damage up to fatalities that have occurred, but we are trying to prevent then future ones through these projects as well. We've got maintenance projects where we try and bring up everything up to current standards, marking out daylighting at intersections, remarking our crosswalks into high visibility, refreshing our tactical treatments and things like that. And then spot treatments, we've got the post-fatal crash intervention. So after a crash occurs, within about 24 hours to the next business day, one of our planning, engineering, or otherwise staff will go out and meet MPD officers at the crash site, take a look, learn what happened, and then that following week, we'll discuss the site as a multidisciplinary team and decide what interventions we can put in to prevent future crashes of the same type or just improve safety at that location, period, for all modes. If there is an existing project at one of these locations, then we're adding in those comments to that effort. And then there's request-based. These are really responsive. These are council requests for activities or focus. This is our traffic safety inputs and then maintenance requests as well. And then Vision Zero. So I work for the DC Vision Zero office. It's a global movement, if you're not familiar, that sees traffic-related deaths and serious injuries as unacceptable and makes traffic safety our highest priority for transportation systems. The The initiative is data-driven. It requires all hands on deck to address traffic safety issues. We do employ, and we've embraced now, a safe systems approach like our US DOT, and acknowledging that traffic safety has layered components that when we strengthen each of those can reduce the frequency and severity of crashes. So what does a safe system mean? We think of it sort of like layers of net or layers of Swiss cheese, so that each layer, safe streets, safe speeds, safe people, safe vehicles, and post-crash care. If someone is falling through, or a crash scenario is falling through one of those holes, there's another layer that has the potential, hopefully, to catch that. So when all of those layers fail, that's when we see a death or serious injury happen. Ideally, we want to strengthen those layers so that we're saving that person or those people before we get to post-crash care. And even if they get to post-crash care, we're able to do life-saving response for them. So the key principles of a safe system, number one, death and serious injuries are unacceptable. So we prioritize the elimination of those types of crashes that result typically in serious injuries or death. Humans make mistakes. We're all human. We are not perfect. So we need to design to accommodate those mistakes and avoid crashes that lead to death and serious injury. We know that humans are vulnerable. Our bodies have physical limits for tolerating crash forces. So focusing on sort of reducing speeds at which people are hit, the weight of vehicles plays a big part into crash survivability and so on. Acknowledging that responsibility is shared, and this means government at all levels is involved and shares responsibility to preventing deaths and serious injuries. That safety is proactive. We're trying to use tools to identify and address safety issues that we've seen around the district, as well as nationwide, and prevent crashes of similar types. And then redundancy is crucial. If we strengthen all of these pieces of our system, then if one part fails, again, another part can catch that person and protect them. Next, DC DDOT staff doesn't care. We hear that a lot. So we want you to know about the industry standards and guidelines that we have and our best practices, a street network, project prioritization, and then culture change. So first, standards and guidelines. So DC and our DDOT engineers and planners, we don't just sort of come up with stuff just offhand. We've got a lot of guidelines that determine where we put what types of treatments. So starting with the federal side, there's a number of guidelines, but the big one, the big few are the manual of on uniform traffic control devices. This dictates, you'll hear a lot of engineers talk about warrants for stop signs or signals. This is the manual that outlines how we assess a location for a stop sign or a traffic signal. Then there's the green book there, the AASHTO green book is what we call it, the geometric design of highways and streets that has more guidelines to it. There's the highway safety manual there that has specific processes for analyzing crashes and selecting the appropriate countermeasures for that. And these are approved countermeasures. So there may be things in other countries and things that look really exciting and look really appealing, but if we aren't able to cite it in one of these or get an experimentation approval from Federal Highway, then it's really difficult to implement those things. For DC as a state, we have our Gold Book, which is standard specifications for highways and structures. We've got our design and engineering manual. That's the one that our engineers will consider pretty much the most. The DCMR also, like Brant talked about earlier, all of our regulations guide what we can and can't do in certain locations, and then our environmental manual as well. Again, there's more that goes into this. We've got a public space manual and things like that, but these are the big ones. And then localized or special programs. So if there are Office of Planning has special design guidelines for the public realm, those are things that we look to and follow. If we've got a livability study that was done in a certain neighborhood, like the one here, Rock Creek East 1, we are looking to that to see what the recommendations might be. We've got a bicycle facility design guide and a bus priority program toolbox, all guiding kind of what goes where and in what situation, you know, different designs or interventions are put in. Then we've got our street network. So a big part of understanding the transportation system is understanding the hierarchy of streets. So there's something called the functional classification. This is a federal highway classification of streets, and there's sort of 4 major types of streets. So the lowest ranking is local street. Those are residential streets, typically providing mostly local access to traffic expected at lower speeds to local bound travelers and carrying shorter trips. So this is, you're turning off of the main street or like a collector street onto your residential street to get to your house. A collector street often carries multimodal traffic from local streets to arterials. So think of this as like a connector between local streets and bigger streets like arterials. Typically higher volumes a little bit than locals, slightly higher speeds expected there. They can have residential uses and mixed uses on these. And then we move to arterials. Arterials are mostly the ones that you'll see on the high injury network. So these are higher volumes serving longer distances while still providing often full access to adjacent land uses. So you can travel in North Capitol and then get to a point where you can park on the side of the street at the curbside and go into one of the businesses and carry out places there. So these are streets that we ask a lot of in DC especially. And then we've got interstate highways and limited access highways. So these are primarily intended for vehicular uses, mostly carry the highest volumes over the longest distances. Often speed limits are 40 miles per hour or over once you get out of DC. These do not provide direct access to specific land uses, and nor should they. So there's recognition of like a balance between access and mobility on that. And so how we prioritize our projects. Really, there's sort of 3 main prioritization efforts: safety, equity, and multimodal mobility. And you'll see this in Move DC as well. There's a couple more guiding principles, state of good repair and such, but in terms of projects, these are our guiding principles. So first is a safety priority. If there's crash history, which is frequency, density, and severity, if there's a lot of crash risk, and we've got conditions similar to those that cause fatal and serious injuries, equity focus areas, Ward 5, 7, and 8 are all equity focus areas. And then mode priorities according to vulnerability. We've outlined this in Vision Zero, but this is the way that we generally prioritize modes and level of comfort for modes. So people walking and wheeling, using mobility assistive devices, people biking and scooting, people in transit vehicles, so in buses, and then people in passenger vehicles as well. So we're looking for safety for all modes, really. The equity priority, we've got a whole Office of Racial Equity in the mayor's office, and then DDOT has its own dedicated equity office. Each of our projects has to go through an equity scoring assessment before it goes through our funding process. So each project that's going into a budget request also has an equity score tied to it. And this is really looking at areas with a lot of BIPOC populations, Black, Indigenous, people of color, low income, poverty rates, high rates of unhoused folks, high rates of persons with disabilities, seniors, children, and then high densities of low English proficiency populations. And then there's multimodal priority. So looking at service, comfort, connectivity for the different modes across DC, while also kind of being sensitive to the others. So when we've got a bike priority project on also a freight priority network street, there's a lot of collaboration that happens between those teams, similarly to bus priority and bike priority and so on. So we work a lot between these teams and with safety to sort of come up with the best options for these. And then culture change, you know, the way that things have always been done, it's hard to change those in a really big government. And progress isn't always linear. Even Norway saw increases in fatalities over their years in trying to implement Vision Zero. Constant reinforcement is something that it takes to get to those directions. It takes multidisciplinary work to support that change. And there's still often no consensus, even within constituents and different communities. You know, you have 100 people involved, you get 100 different opinions on something. So these are issues and things that play into projects as well. For this section, I will throw it over to my colleague, Kelly Jong Olsen, to talk about how DDOT in DC engages with people. So Kelly, you want?
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Kelly Jong Olsen, Community Engagement Manager at DDOT. So I'd like to talk about, we hear a lot that DC or DC government in general, DDOT doesn't really engage with people. So here, key things to know is, because we do have dedicated, engagement team under DDOT and also under Mayor's office. I want to introduce the whole team, and then ANC role and how DDOT works with ANCs, and then notice of intent process. So this is my team. So I'm the manager. So we have dedicated like one person per ward. So we have community engagement specialists. So we have Ward 1, Minyoung and Donovan, Christian, Cornelius, Delando, Abraham, Tanya, Sierra. I hope everybody on this call, ANC commissioners or either community leaders or stakeholders, you should be able to know the my team members by now. But if not, there's a link there. So that's our website. So you will be able to see our full name, and there's a link so you can reach out to anybody through the links. Basically, we are the gatekeepers for DDOT. So as you know, DDOT is 1,200 employee, like very big agency. So today we are mostly talking about policy, legislative process, and also like safety project and program. However, we also maintain the road. We also maintain streetlights, trees. So we have a lot of, teams within DDOT. So, people may not be sure who to reach out within DDOT, and sometimes they reach out to DDOT for some non-DDOT issues. I just want community members to know that who to reach out under DDOT, and we are here to help you. So next slide. So as you know, some people may reach out to DDOT for like parking enforcement. I mean, that's fair, perception that, okay, DC government, DDOT does parking policy and parking signs. So they may think that we do parking enforcement, which is not true. So our job is to make sure residents understand which agency is responsible for. For example, parking enforcement is under DPW. So we sometimes connect with the DPW's parking enforcement team, but sometimes issues are more complicated than just parking enforcement. Then we are working closely with Mayor's Office of Community Relations Services. So we call it MOCRS. So they have 2 people per ward. They are Mayor's liaison to listen to community concern and connecting people with appropriate government services. So we have good relations with them, and we always, connect residents with them so that, Mayor's Office, MOCRS team can help address their issues. Of course, their information is also public, so you can go to like MOCRS website and you will see the full list as well. So we do work closely with ANCs and community stakeholders. And as you know, ANC commissioners are elected officials and they're non-paid position, but they are working so hard. I mean, many of you are already here, but thank you always for your hard work and, service. So basically ANC is the neighborhood official voice. So we really want to work closely with ANC commissioners whenever we have any project and upcoming issues. We always reach out to ANCs to get more insight and also seek some advice from them. So we also ANC commissioners often send us resolution letters with their requests, comments, and recommendations for based on our any proposal or any plans that we present to the community. So as you know, I think Brent mentioned this earlier, but these district agencies, including DDOT, we are required to give ANC recommendation a great weight. So when we review their recommendations, we have to consider those with great weight. And however, that doesn't mean that we have to follow. However, we are required to provide explanation on why we ended up with certain determination. Give me 1 second, I'm sorry. Sorry about that. So as you know, so DDOT, we do issue notice of intent. This is for the public, but whenever we issue those, we send this to ANC commissioners as well as to post on our website, for the public website, so that anybody have access to it. So we give 30 days for ANCs and public members of public can provide any comments. And it is required, especially when we modify traffic and parking requirements. So we often get questions and complaints that Kelly or DDOT, we didn't know about this. Why didn't DDOT, issue NOI for this? And there's always sometimes miscommunications because people assume that certain changes require notice of intent, but by law, we are only required to issue NOI for when we modify traffic patterns, such as a new signal, new stop sign. But for example, speed hump, we are not really changing the pattern. We are just adding safety feature. For that sense, notice of intent is not required. However, we understand the community has some frustration. They want to know more in advance. So we are improving our notification process. Not NOI, but courtesy type of notice of notifications to ANCs at least. So for example, for speed hump, we are sending 10-day just courtesy notification just to give heads up to ANC commissioners when there's any new speed hump coming up to their SMD, a single member district. Or for example, for paving project, we know that a lot of residents are concerned about their parking. Even though the paving project is very temporary, we understand that they want to plan accordingly. So in addition to required emergency no parking signs we post for any project, we also send email to ANCs about a week in advance, and also we do door hanger. Our contractors go out door to door to put door hanger just to give heads up that, hey, that road paving project is coming up. That doesn't have exact date, but just giving a heads up. And then it's followed by emergency no parking signs on the block, so the residents can see exactly what time and what block is going to be paved. Lastly, as I mentioned, we are working very closely with ANC, and we heavily rely on them for any recommendations and advice. So we did host a virtual open house event for ANCs back in February. And also we are hosting in-person one just for exclusively for ANC commissioners in 2 weeks. So this slide has a little more information about notice of intent process. As I mentioned, it is required by law to give this written notification, especially when we modify traffic patterns and parking requirements. That means if we have to remove, let's say, RPP, residential permit, parking permit for certain project, we have to notify ANC and public so that they are aware. However, when sometimes people may think that DDOT removed some parking, but when we looked at it, actually it was already illegal. For example, at the intersection, let's say there's a stop sign, and it is by DC code that you cannot park for certain, feet from fire hydrant, from crosswalk from driveway, but there was just no sign previously, but it was still legal and DPW parking enforcement team still can enforce those. But by adding some sign, people may think that DDOT removed signs, but technically it was not required to provide written notice because we were not removing legal parking. So this is kind of community engagement team's job to explain what happened. And of course, we are trying to avoid any miscommunication. So we're trying our best to always reach out to ANC for any changes. But of course, if you hear anything from the resident, always reach out to us so that we can check with our project team and relevant teams to get you more details. Any questions?
Kelly, you've got one question in the chat from Karthik. Is the NOA process required when bringing a road up to compliance with DC law? For example, site distance code, and what are some of the exceptions?
I think I briefly mentioned, I think it depends. Sometimes, let me check site distance code. Yes, so for as far as I know, I mean, Christine, just chime in if you need, but for example, let's say there was no signs previously at the intersection and people assume that it's okay to park because there's no signs. And then when we look at it, we just put, signs, even like parking team can do it sometimes, right? Because it's per the DC code. So yeah, it depends. I mean, it would be case by case, but it is my understanding that it is not required when we are removing illegal parking. So it's only required when we are removing legal parkings. Currently, anybody or people with permit can park legally, but then we have to remove it. Then we have to notify the residents so that they are aware.
Great. Commissioner Glover, you've got your hand up. Do you want to go ahead?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having this workshop. I'm a new commissioner and we have worked in Deanwood with DDOT a lot, but I had some concerns and I'm glad you were showing me the steps on what I would need to take in my community. It's still, when I put a request in, I still have to go to DC 311. There's not a way for us to do requests with DDOT directly.
It depends, but can you give us an example what kind of request you're referring to?
Okay, so when I was meeting some of the residents, when I was walking around giving my hangers my information, they wanted a curb on 48th Place, the 800 block by the subway in Nanny Helen. And I did a DC 311, that was months ago, but there's no direct connection of knowing if that's going to be done or not. So I really do not have an answer to get back with that resident who want a curb. They did the side across from her, but they didn't do her side for.
Do you mean the curb by the sidewalk where I see? I think I'm pretty familiar with the location, maybe because Tanya, I think you reach out to her, right? So yeah, it's a little tricky because curb is part of like sidewalk. So we do repairs curb when that if there's already the like repair plan for the sidewalk and then when we go out, but we do not like typically like go out and proactively repair curb, right? Unless it is a really big safety hazard. Because, we have a sidewalk plan and program, we have a roadway paving plan and alley, but curb is part of sidewalk, not our like big priority, if that makes sense. So if there's that case, I mean, it's great because, 301 is fine, but as you know, like you did 301, but it takes time, but you can always reach out to us, the community engagement team, so that we can provide more like background on why it takes long and why it's not addressed, quicker. So yeah, always 301 is still, even if you reach out to us, we create our own 311 anyways, because that's really important for the tracking. Because, if you just reach out to us and with issue, and then we try to follow up, then sometimes, the response issue. So 311 is still key, but with the number, we can look into the details even quicker and get back to you with more update.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I want to reiterate just the value of filing a 311 request, even if it doesn't look like it goes anywhere, or even if it looks like it's being closed out, because like you have it. I know that I've done this not just because I work on this stuff, but as like a resident in my own neighborhood, I've filed my 311 request so that I can forward it to the ward liaisons or to a MOKR or whoever else, just to say like, I did put it in, here's what I said, here is my record. I think you closed this inappropriately, or I need to understand why you did it. So definitely suggest doing that, because if you don't file it, then like someone on Kelly's team might, and you can probably give better and more complete detail. Commissioner Lewis, you have your hand up if you want to go ahead. Carla, go ahead. And if you're not there, that's okay. Just unmute when you can. For the purposes of the recording, the project prioritizations are public. They're on visionzero.dc.gov and movedc.dc.gov. Bus priority and bike priority teams also have their own websites. Anyone else? Heather, go ahead.
I think this is very helpful. The challenge, of course, is that you have many quite different audiences across the city. No offense to Commissioner Glover, but I think that there are many people who don't find ANCs as their mode for communication. So I'm especially interested, and I've seen some wonderful outreach by DDOT staff on major roadway safety projects and so forth, to do a wide variety of outreach. And I think it'd be really valuable to take this presentation and a lot of work, but vary it for maybe 4 or 5 different audiences. I think very heavily, I don't know everybody on the call, but I think you've got, to some extent, the cognoscenti, who know the acronyms, who know the terms, who know what multimodal means, and especially the first part of Christine's with the Swiss cheese image. I think there's a lot that could be done for different audiences that would be tremendously helpful because when I work with seniors mostly. So when I talk with people, and the issue of bike lanes comes up, when it's approached through speeding cars, there's a very different reaction, and it may be unintelligible, but there are a lot of people who don't understand that the road re-engineering is actually addressing speed. So different, it's a question of outreach by the government to explain these pretty complex changes, in my view.
Yeah, thanks for that. I know, sort of, as we said up front, for those who joined after my little spiel at the beginning, is that typically DDOT is in your community to talk about a specific project, because like that is often when outreach happens. I mean, Christine can go back to her slide, right, of when outreach happens, and very often that happens when it's like, oh, this is going to change, so we're bringing it to the ANC or we're bringing it to the Civic Association. And so I'm excited that we've been able to host this. I hope also that, like, as things like as we move forward, the switch in the TSI process, I think, has enabled a little bit more interface with like how DDOT works structurally. So I'm glad this has been valuable. I wanted to, before we get to some of the other questions, a lot of like what we were talking about with this is really dependent on what Move DC says, and how often is Move DC updated, and how do like changes to Move DC get made. Christine, if you could give a little bit more info on that.
Yeah, so typically the long-range transportation plans are looked at about every 10 years to do an entire sort of redo of the big plans. Sometimes we'll take another look at different chapters or different neighborhoods on a sort of ad hoc or as needed basis. So if we're, for instance, seeing a lot of development in like the North Cap corridor, then we'd want to look at that for transit improvements, things like that. So we're sort of constantly looking at how to improve multimodal service and options. But our guiding light is generally Move DC.
Great, thank you. Carla, are you able to speak? I'm sorry if that was an issue. Okay, in the chat, protocol is not followed for the New Jersey Avenue Lane Diet project. Residents did not have an opportunity to provide feedback, and there was a fatal crash after implementing the project.
Yes, Commissioner Lewis. Yeah, we are very well aware of this issue, and then we did respond to ANC multiple times. And I understand that ANC reached out to us for extending the existing NOI, but we were not able to extend for like a month, but we were able to like extend for only a week. But then I think Commissioner felt that it was not enough for residents to chime in. But however, we did receive, many comments from residents, including Ward 5 residents and along New Jersey Avenue. And then after considering all the comments, we decided to move forward. Yeah, that was our decision. And then we share with the ANC commissioners.
Aaron, you've got your hand up. Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thanks. I don't think I did a good job of phrasing my question. It was less about what are the general priorities, but like understanding, given the limited funds, which projects specifically get funded in which order. I think that there's like an approach that they have done with capital improvements to schools, which try and remove the political influence from the process. And I was hoping for something similar in the DDOT process for capital improvements. And I think it's hard to tell why some projects are funded this year and next year and others aren't, especially when you look at the other things that are supposed to be incorporated into the assessment.
Yeah, so that process is a little bit ongoing. And this is a conversation we're having with our other folks in bus priority, bike priority teams, and then our capital infrastructure teams, sort of long range planning. Because in previous years, I think we have had maybe in 2014 Move DC plan, but definitely in our like pedestrian master plan and our bicycle master plan, I think we had sort of a list of when we would work on different corridors. With the addition of our high injury network, we're sort of trying to rethink that. And actually, yes, like to your point, come up with this sort of prioritized list of when are we going to see different projects go in. Our bus priority program has a really good plan set up for that. Our bike priority program has their like a look ahead up to FY24 on their website that I linked. But yeah, the missing link is our high injury network, and that's something that we're currently working on.
Christine, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, good, great. I don't know what happened to the icons for the video and the mic, but they disappeared from my screen, so I couldn't turn it on. Okay, so let's go back to the elephant in the room, which is a New Jersey Avenue Lane Diet project. And I'm sorry, I am going to bring this up over and over and over again until I receive satisfactory input, comment. Number one, this seems to have been expedited by another ANC, which is ANC 6E, by them writing a resolution to implement the lane diet with the bike lanes, okay, with the permanent bike lanes. Now, ANC 5E was involved in, I guess, a couple of meetings that were held with DDOT and ANC 6E. But what we noticed is that the residents that would be directly impacted were not involved and included in those meetings, which is the reason why I wrote a letter request an extension, and we were never told that we could get a week extension. That was never, I did not receive formal written communication from DDOT, even though we wrote a formal letter from ANC 5E requesting an extension. We did not receive formal feedback from DDOT stating why that we could not get an extension in order to hear feedback from residents. Also, the residents were not communicated to by DDOT. There were no door hangers put on those residents' houses to let them know that these changes were coming. I did go and distribute the NOI door to door to some of the residents within my single member district, but DDOT did not reach out to the residents that lived there. So they were totally blindsided by the changes. Why? Because the NOI information that's given to them isn't really in layman's terms, and it doesn't really spell out what the changes and impacts are going to be to the residents up front. You have to go in and look at those diagrams in order to see how many parking spaces are going to be lost, where they were going to be removed, where they were going to be put. So I believe that, and I've already written the resolution addressing that communications of this sort from DDOT, I think, is pertinent to the residents. So we need to have this type of information and sent to the residents. And last but not least, there was an accident about a week or two after those lane changes were implemented with a scooterist who actually died. So that scooterist succumbed to their injuries this year. So that's a fate, and that happened after the changes have been implemented on New Jersey Avenue. Now, I did hear something about, oh, Norway has had deaths or whatever have you, but what are we doing to look at this? Because perhaps if the residents have been able to provide some feedback with regards to these changes, it could have been avoided. Not only that, people are creatures of habit. If you drive down a certain road 30, 40 years, and all of a sudden it changed, and you are not aware of that change, you are going to continue your same driving habits. So you need to put up, other signs or something to make people aware of the fact that the road has been changed, and so that their behavior will also change, as well as communication in the media and other things of that nature. So I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, thank you so much for your feedback. I mean, I definitely understand. However, I think maybe Christian can go back to your previous slide that explains, where residents can, residents' input can be most effectively, considered. I mean, the move DC towards, the project portion, the possibility of the actual big change to the project is actually low, because at that point, that location is already prioritize and determined to do the project. At that point, it's not easy. It's not impossible. It's not easy for us just to not do the project, or I think just timing didn't really work well. However, I mean, I just want to correct that we did respond multiple times officially via email, and I think our director also did it. So we also provide the letter, number of support letter we received the resident and number of signatures we received. So sometimes, as DDOT has to make very difficult decision and unpopular decision. We cannot make everybody happy. We are really trying to do our best to make good decision based on the information we have and data we have. So this was one of the projects that we had to proceed with. So we understand commissioners' concern and feedback. We are going to improve our communications moving forward. We will continue to do so as well. So thank you.
Okay, I just want to also state that initially, the very first letter that we sent out, we did not get any feedback from DDOT. I want that to be clear. All right. My second resolution and letter and emails, that was followed up by DDOT, yes, with the number of statistics. And the statistics were really sad, as a matter of fact. I mean, when you looked at the number of people that actually provided feedback in comparison to the general populace, it was poor. It was really poor. So for DDOT to proceed in that direction with a very low input from the residents, I believe, was not a good thing. anyway, I'm done with it, but I just wanted to put that out there, that better communications to the ANC, communications to the residents, communications with regards to changes, to infrastructure changes, to make drivers aware of the fact that changes have been made. Those things are sorely needed by DDOT.
Thank you. I did want to your point about the fatality that occurred with the scooter rider. Yeah, we have all of our fatality memos or post-fatal memos that document what happened in the crash, what we looked at when we were at the site, and then any mitigation measures or safety treatments that we can do in response to that are posted on the website. There's a little bit of a delay because of a review process that goes through internally, but we should have that scooter fatality on there as well. I do know that was due to a left turn, and I think the person didn't yield the right of way, but I'd have to look back at that location. But yeah, that's something that anytime a fatality or a critical crash happens, when our MPD major crash unit responds, they also let us know, and we then send someone on site to learn what happened. Not initially, we don't want to be around a dead body, we want our first responders to be able to respond as quickly as they can and as effectively as they can, but as close to the crash as possible. We have staff out there looking at the location.
Okay, so I appreciate that. But the one thing that has not been looked at is the fact that we also raised that there's already a bottleneck of traffic between New York Avenue and P Street. And now the bottleneck is from New York Avenue to Rhode Island Avenue.
I was just making a note of that. Yeah, a lot of our trade-offs are for safety tend to be operations. So we do have to move people more slowly to be able to improve safety for the location. So yeah, in some cases we do have to make those trade-offs, and we do try and work with the community, but ultimately we've got mayoral and a lot of folks bought in and on eliminating fatalities district-wide. So these are single projects, but we're working across the district to try and improve safety across the board. But I understand congestion remains an issue for a lot of folks.
I wanted to elevate Heather's comment about, communicating things. I know through my own work that you can almost never do enough outreach, right? Like someone is always going to tell you the thing you didn't do. And like, that is not to say like, oh my God, we shouldn't do it, but that it's not always possible to do everything. That sounds like a great idea, but there are certainly things that DDOT could do more of. Nonprofit organizations like my own could do more of. Kelly and Christine, maybe can you talk a little bit about just sort of like the limitations, but also like possibilities of outreach when you are actually trying to do a project? Like how much is doable with the resources that your agency has?
I think I can start first. So I think it also depends on projects. So we have like capital project done by like infrastructure, IP, like what is that called? What?
Infrastructure project management.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, IPMA. I only go by acronym. Sorry. So depending on the project, the scope of or limit of the project is also vary, right? So what we are trying to work with is, for example, like, bike project or like kind of a smaller like scope project. I think that's where we actually go into actual residential street, right? So we are really trying to do at least like flyer, because, you know, ANC commissioners are great and email communications are great, NOIs are great, but still people are still, you know, they may not have a full access to the internet or not comfortable. So we want to make sure at least like one flyer just to let them know and have some contact information so that they can reach out to us and get more information. So at least like one like physical flyer for project, that's our kind of target, but that only includes actual like safety project, not like all speed off, not all like small like sign, you know, projects. So to be really realistic, we are really focusing on project outreach versus like everything we do, which is impossible. Like, you know, we do, that means we need to do like this tree or like street light, those kind of like changes we cannot. But in terms of project, especially when it has impact for like parking, things like that, we are in the process of improving our internal process to unifying the outreach protocol. So you'll be hearing more from us, especially, you know, with contact information and more like flyering as well.
Yeah, and I'd say as it comes to projects, so there's some initiatives where we're like council mandated to do something by a certain time, like the 20 by 24, I think it was, or 20 by 22, I forget the dates on it. There's council mandates on when we need to deliver a certain amount of projects to that. And so with that, we have to reach out to you all as ANCs, as our official kind of representatives of the neighborhood. You are the ones that we reach out to say, look, this is coming. We're trying to meet our targets and our goals as mandated by council or the mayor. And you know, we've got to do it within the time frame that we can to account for construction time and things like that. So there's a lot of balancing act that happens. And like I said, I think we could study a corridor to death and engage in, you know, hundreds and hundreds of meetings and still not get to a point where everyone agrees. People are gonna feel differently about different things and different treatments. So we just try as government to do the best thing for the most people, and to reach the goals that we've set for ourselves, whether that's sustainability and safety and multimodal options, things like that. So like I showed earlier, that kind of major transportation plan and those neighborhood plans, those are the points where you can really give us that feedback and tell us what you want to see or not see in your neighborhood, and we can plan around those things.
I think it's also worth noting that the district has some pretty clear targets for reducing emissions in addition to reducing fatalities, and that does mean that people need to travel by car less. And that does not necessarily mean you specifically, but someone else has to do it. And so the Move DC, Vision Zero, Sustainable DC, you know, there are plans with certain targets in them. And of course, it would be great if we could communicate all of this in full to everyone all of the time. But there is a point at which, you know, those are big plans that the government itself has made, and it's kind of, you know, by virtue of electing the people who are in charge, that is also a form of input. So not to put too much pressure on all of our ANC commissioners here, but you know, to some degree, your constituents are looking to you for leadership in that, and it's not always going to be easy, but I often think of how an ANC has one, you know, or has like 2,000 people, right, per SMD, and I don't have 2,000 friends, right? The idea that you would be able to meet the needs and the preferences of 2,000 people, and then, you know, take that up to district-wide where we're at almost 700,000 residents, it's probably not possible to meet everybody's needs in individualized fashion. So that's just something to consider and be thoughtful of as we're, you know, trying to get this to a better place, right? Say, Brian Kelly, you seem to be chatting about lights, and I'm gonna leave you to that because that seems like a specific problem that maybe you all can solve in a one-on-one. But I want to bring up Dan's question about when the bike priority plan will be updated beyond FY24.
Yeah, I think we'll have to get back to you on that with the bike team and see when they're gonna set up their next 3-year look ahead. We can try and get that for the ward meetings, or at least, you know, when we can expect it.
Cool, that would be helpful. Erin, your hand is up.
Yeah, thanks for the slide on the community input. I found that really helpful. I guess I was wondering if you had a suggestion on, you know, I've looked at the Move DC plan and the livability studies for a few different corridors in our area, and the designs that have come out drop major components from those studies and the Move DC plan. And I wondered if you had a suggestion on how to approach that, because we're like limiting our community input at this point.
Yeah, some of that comes from looking at feasibility. So like if in a livability study, the way we used to do them was sort of unlimited scope, kind of whatever we could do and put in this plan, but didn't have sort of a dedicated time frame or pipeline. We, you know, realized the issues with that and are still working to implement some of those recommendations. But if they're not feasible anymore because of development or conditions have changed, or even sometimes there's like a manhole or something that's owned by a different utility and difficult. So there is a difference between like the plan stage and the implementation and design phase, and that is like looking at the constructability of some of these in terms of feasibility studies. A lot of them we're trying to put them into our capital infrastructure plans. Like there's one for Rock Creek East 2 that we've then folded into the Kennedy Street revitalization project on 14th, Longfellow and Illinois. I think there was a whole intersection reconfiguration. So to the extent that we can, we're trying to fold those into bigger capital projects when we have the ability to. In terms of Move DC and different priorities, so the teams will go out when we do outreach, and maybe Kelly, you can speak more to this, but for like a Wheeler Road, she will go out. Karen McAllister did extensive outreach in the community, put out, you know, mailers and door hangers and things like that, because this had a longer time frame with a longer implementation period. We were going to do a quick build because of all the safety issues that existed on the street, but then there was a longer time frame for a capital project to come through. For quicker build projects, I have a project on Southern Avenue from Pennsylvania to Benning Road. This is where we are in dire need of safety improvements, and it is one of our highest fatality corridors, Southern Avenue as a whole in the district. So this is where we have to act fast to prevent more people from being killed or seriously injured. So some of these things may be prioritized over others. So originally, and Good Hope Road is another good example of that, where we sort of have to pick our battle to get a greater benefit on safety, and then let those other project specific teams come back. You know, we don't want to preclude anything that they're going to do, but we'll let those project teams come back and then implement whatever recommendation is in their specific program plan. So we consider it a phased approach. It won't be the last bite at the apple, but we do sometimes have to phase in those efforts.
Sorry, I may have misunderstood earlier comments, but I thought that it was advised that the input time was best at the Move DC plan and the livability studies, and then it decreases. And so, like, I guess it's hard to understand when major components are dropped, but then we also have less community input to say, like, why are like, no, that was a big part of what we wanted. You did, like, I guess I feel like there's like a conflict there that or maybe I'm just misunderstanding.
Yeah, I think I hear what you're saying. Some of them are are quick build to respond to a specific issue, like the high fatalities. And those will, as much as we can include in that scope, we will include, so like bus treatments and things like that. But if we don't get a lot of support, so bike lanes, for instance, if we don't get a lot of support on the bike lane as part of the safety project, we don't want to hold up the safety project, and we'll see it as a phased approach and let our bike team know then to come back and work a little bit closer with the community. And we'll put in temporary treatments in that case, so that when they come back and work closer with you all on the bike project, and the design of that and what the infrastructure looks like, you know, there's nothing in the way of doing that. But sometimes we do have to take sort of a phased approach in that, depending on the urgency of the need.
Heather, go ahead.
Another component that would be very helpful is, and I've talked to Christine about this before, is why certain projects take longer, especially when you get involved with utilities and things like that, or what it takes to improve one intersection. And it's very, very hard. I've learned a lot from sort of engineers on the ground about what it takes. And I think it's an issue of realism. I used to use the analogy that a child doesn't learn to use a fork, knife, and spoon, you know, right away. And a bit hearing what some, you know, even on a faster scale, what it takes to complete projects, I think would be helpful. And unfortunately, council members almost never ask about this. So the expectations get raised and raised to do more and more with the same amount of staff. That's my perception.
Kelly or Christine, any feedback on that?
No, I think that's, yeah, that's that summarizes it pretty well.
I've tended to divide projects in my head as requiring curb work or not requiring curb work, which is not an official distinction that is made on DDOT's org chart or anything, but it has been really helpful to me in understanding like what is a sort of like heavier, more expensive, more intensive project versus what is something that is a little bit easier to install. It's 7:37. These are awesome questions. I am really grateful for everyone spending time with us tonight. I'm going to wind this down with a sort of reminder that we have upcoming sessions. Next Monday, 6 to 7:30 is a ward specific session for Ward 8. The following Monday, May 22nd, 6 to 7:30 p.m. Ward specific session for Ward 7. And then Wednesday, May 31st is a ward specific session, 6 to 7:30 for Ward 5. Send me questions. I'm an ABACA at jujuwash.org. If you have some recommendations for what to include in those ward specific sessions. Thank you so much to Vinia for throwing out there, talking about the specifics of traffic engineering for safety compared to mitigation measures. I think that's a really good topic. I am really looking forward to getting a little bit more into the weeds on some of this stuff. This was recorded. Takes a little bit to export and upload a recording, but once I have it, I will circulate it. Again, this is the first of a couple of sessions and I'm looking forward to the next one. So thank you so much, Christine and Kelly, for being here. Thank you all for attending. Yeah, feel free to share some feedback and hopefully we'll all see you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Everyone, have a good night.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.